At Christmas dinner, my mother stared straight into my eyes and said, "You'll never match your brother's success. Quit wasting our time." Everyone laughed. Until they discovered what I did after midnight. Can you imagine spending your entire life feeling like the invisible sibling, constantly overlooked, laughed at? Now, imagine hearing your own parents, behind closed doors, planning to completely erase you from the family's future. It was a betrayal that gutted me to my core, but what if that wasn't the end of my story, but the moment I decided to burn their expectations to the ground? My name's Nathan, and honestly, for as long as I can remember, Christmas dinner in my family has felt less like a celebration and more like a twisted stage play where I'm always the punchline. My older brother, Michael? He's the golden child, all right. The one with the steady finance job, the perfect fiancé, the smile that charms everyone. Me? I took the road less traveled. Started my own tech company from scratch, the risky path they all warned me against. It wasn't flashy, not at first. Years of late nights, ramen for dinner, working in quiet obscurity while everyone back home just dismissed it as a hobby. And no matter what progress I made, no one ever seemed to care. Christmas was always a fresh wound. From the moment we walked in, it was all Michael. Mom fussing over his coat, Dad pulling him into the den to talk business. Me? I'd be standing there, casserole in hand, feeling like a side character in my own life. Even as a kid, the favoritism was stark. Michael got guitar lessons, tutors, his own car. I got a pat on the back for an A, maybe a mumbled, "Good job." My family didn't just play favorites, they broadcast it. But this Christmas? This one hit different. It was the night everything changed. Dinner had just been served, the usual spread, ham, mashed potatoes, casseroles. I was trying to just focus on the food, to get through the evening without letting their usual digs get under my skin. But then, halfway through the meal, Mom set her fork down. Her gaze locked onto me, and the room went silent. You know that kind of silence? The one that tells you something sharp, something painful, is about to drop. And then she said it, her voice flat, like a cold, hard fact she'd rehearsed 1,000 times. "You'll never be as successful as your brother, Nathan. Stop wasting our time." Those words didn't just land, they ripped through me. My fork froze, halfway to my mouth. I felt a hot flush crawl up my chest, my palms suddenly clammy against the tablecloth. For a split second, I thought maybe I'd misheard. But then it came. Laughter. Not nervous chuckles or polite coughs. Actual, genuine laughter from my aunts, my cousins, even my dad. And Michael? He just smirked, sipping his wine, like he'd just won a competition I didn't even know we were still playing. I laughed too, actually. But not because it was funny. More because if I didn't laugh, I swear to God, I would have snapped right there in front of them all. This wasn't the first time they'd dismissed me, but it was the first time they'd done it so openly, so viciously, with everyone joining in. That sting of humiliation felt different. It felt permanent. I forced a smile, staring down at my plate. But inside, something was twisting. Something was shifting. I wasn't going to argue. Not there, not in front of everyone. That's what they wanted. A scene, another reason to call me dramatic or sensitive. No, I stayed quiet. I let them laugh. But I couldn't stop thinking about what was waiting after midnight, when the house would be silent, and their smug faces wouldn't be around to see what I had been quietly building all this time. Because while they saw me as the family failure, what they didn't know was that for the past year, something massive had been set in motion. Something none of them could mock away. And this Christmas of all nights was the turning point. That was the moment I decided I wasn't just going to endure their disrespect anymore. I was going to change the entire conversation. And by the time that clock struck midnight, everything they thought they knew about me, about who I was, would be utterly shattered. I sat there, quietly chewing my food, as the laughter around me eventually died down. On the surface, the conversation drifted back to safer topics. Michael's upcoming promotion, his wedding plans, his brilliant investment strategies. But under the table, my leg bounced with a nervous energy, like it was ready to run a marathon. It wasn't just Mom's comment. It was how normal it felt to everyone else. No one flinched. No one defended me. No one even hesitated. In my family's eyes, I had already been cast into the role of less than, and they were just playing their parts. Michael leaned back in his chair, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "You know, Mom, you're right. Success is about discipline. Nathan just doesn't have that in him. I mean, how many times have you tried to explain that a steady job is better than chasing some idea?" I caught Dad nodding approvingly, a smug little tug at his lips, exactly the smirk he always wore when Michael spoke like this. Exactly, Dad chimed in. Stability is the mark of a man, not these startup dreams. Startup dreams. The way he said it, like I was some teenager pitching apps in a garage, not someone who'd built a team of 12 employees, secured actual client contracts, and tripled revenue in the last year alone. Of course, they didn't know any of that. They never asked. The table buzzed with stories about Michael, how he closed on a condo, how he treated everyone to steak dinner, how he negotiated a lower price on his engagement ring. Every story was another brick on the pedestal they'd built for him, a pedestal I'd never been allowed to climb. Then came the little digs, the kind that almost sounded harmless if you weren't truly listening. My aunt leaned across the table with a syrupy smile. Nathan, dear, do you still live in that, what do you call it, that tiny apartment downtown? Oh, you must be so cramped. Before I could even answer, Mom chimed in. He doesn't mind. He's always been adaptable. He makes do with less. Her tone was saccharine, but her words dripped with pure condescension. I forced a tight smile. It's not bad. The view's good. Michael grinned. Yeah, the view of the parking lot. He said it lightly, and the table erupted again, forks clinking against plates as the laughter circled back to me. What made it worse wasn't just the jokes. It was how perfectly coordinated it felt. Every time I tried to contribute anything, the conversation would pivot back to Michael, like he was the sun and the rest of us were just orbiting. I mentioned I'd been working long hours recently, and Dad interrupted me mid-sentence to ask Michael about his bonus. I brought up a trip I was planning with friends, and Mom sighed, saying, maybe you should be saving that money for something useful, like your future. My future? As if I didn't have one. The tension in my chest grew heavier with every dismissal. This dynamic wasn't new. It had existed for years, but something about tonight made it sharper, harder to swallow. Maybe it was the directness of Mom's comment, maybe the way no one blinked before laughing at me. Or maybe it was because I had something they couldn't see, something they assumed I'd never have. Dessert came out, pumpkin pie, Michael's favorite. Mom made a big show of slicing him the largest piece. For my successful son, she said, beaming with pride. Then she glanced at me, sliding over a sliver so small it looked like a mistake. And for Nathan. I wasn't sure if she even realized what she was doing, but the symbolism wasn't lost on me. Michael gets abundance. I get scraps. Always. When everyone was settled with their pie, Dad clinked his glass for attention. I want to make a toast, he boomed, rising slightly from his chair, his voice carrying all the authority he always wielded. To Michael. To his future, his marriage, his career, and the man he's become. You've made us proud. Everyone raised their glasses. Mine stayed rooted to the table. No one noticed. As the toast echoed around the room, I sat in silence, staring into my pie. The sweetness tasted like ash in my mouth. I wasn't jealous. Not in the way they thought I should be. I was furious. Furious that years of effort, sacrifice, and grit had been reduced to a running joke. Furious that no matter how much I built, they couldn't look at me without seeing failure. But most of all, I was just tired. Tired of being the easy target. Tired of letting them dictate who I was. And while they clinked glasses and celebrated Michael's brilliance, I quietly decided I was going to change the script. Because in just a few hours, after midnight, I'd finally have the chance to remind them that the son they wrote off, the one they dismissed, mocked, and humiliated, wasn't the weak link in this family. I was something else entirely. Dinner stretched late, the kind of lingering family event where the air feels heavier with each passing minute. The laughter had softened into quieter conversations, my uncle debating politics with my dad, cousins huddled around phones, Michael at the center of it all, holding court like a king among his loyal subjects. I stayed mostly quiet, trying not to let the sting of the earlier comments burrow too deep. But it was like being trapped in a room where every breath you took reminded you that you didn't belong. I had just stood up to clear my plate when Michael's fiancée, Rachel, called out from the other side of the table. Hey, Nathan, I saw your company's website the other day. For a split second, I felt my chest lift, thinking, maybe, just maybe, someone noticed. Really? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended, almost betraying how badly I wanted to be recognized. Rachel smiled politely, though it was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Yeah, Michael was showing me, just to see what you were working on. She hesitated, glancing toward Michael before continuing. It looks small. I mean, it's cute, but do people really pay for that kind of thing? The room chuckled, and Michael leaned back with a satisfied grin. I told her, "You've just been experimenting like a hobbyist." "It's fine, Nat. We all need side projects." Side projects. That word burned hotter than fire. My company wasn't a side project. It was years of sweat, of sacrifice, of clawing through doubt and setbacks. It paid my bills. It supported employees who believed in me. And here he was, reducing it to something on par with a stamp collection. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing myself not to lash out. But the worst was yet to come. A little later, while I was helping stack plates in the kitchen, I overheard Mom and Dad speaking with Michael in the den. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop. I was just passing through the hallway, but their voices carried. "Look, your brother means well," Dad was saying, his tone low but firm. "But he's not stable. He's not reliable." Mom added, "That business of his could collapse any day." Which is why we've been talking. "When the time comes, if something happens to us, we want you to be the one to manage the estate. Not Nathan. He just wastes. You know how he is." I froze, my hand gripping the edge of the doorway. Estate. My chest went tight. They weren't just dismissing me at the dinner table anymore. They were actively planning to erase me entirely from the family's future. Michael's reply was like a knife, twisting deeper. "Don't worry, I'll take care of it. He doesn't need to know. He'll be fine on his own." They all laughed softly, like it was a secret, shared agreement. I stood there in silence, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't just about Michael being the favorite anymore. This was about them actively deciding I wasn't worthy. Not of trust, not of inheritance, not of family legacy. They were cutting me out behind closed doors. And if I hadn't overheard, I would have never known until it was too late. For a long moment, I couldn't move. The voices in the den blurred into static, my vision tunneling. That was the breaking point. The betrayal I hadn't prepared for. I always thought their dismissiveness was just ignorance, that maybe one day they'd realize I wasn't the screw-up they thought I was. But this was intentional. Calculated. I backed away from the door, my hands trembling. Every laugh, every smirk, every toast to Michael suddenly made sense in a sharper, crueler light. They weren't just humiliating me, they were erasing me. I didn't storm in. I didn't yell. Instead, I slipped upstairs to the guest room where I was staying. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the darkened window, and I let the weight of it all sink in. The humiliation, the betrayal, the years of being told I'd never measure up. It was all boiling now, condensing into something stronger than anger. I whispered to myself, almost as a vow, "They don't know who I am. Not yet. But they will." Because after midnight, when the world outside that house went still, I would set things in motion that none of them could laugh away. And for the first time that night, I smiled. I didn't sleep. I lay in that guest room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled hum of laughter downstairs as the family settled into their post-dinner rituals, board games, drinks, Michael spinning stories about deals and promotions, my parents soaking up every word like gospel. Meanwhile, I felt hollow, like something inside me had caved in. It wasn't just the humiliation anymore. It was the betrayal. To know that my own parents had already decided I was unworthy of their trust, unworthy of their future, was like a crushing weight on my chest. My entire life, I'd told myself that if I worked hard enough, if I proved myself enough, maybe they'd finally see me differently. But no, they'd already made up their minds. In their eyes, I was expendable. I thought about all the sacrifices I'd made, the birthdays I skipped to finish work, the relationships that fizzled because I couldn't afford both a girlfriend and a business, the nights I fell asleep on the office floor wondering if the gamble I'd taken would ever pay off. All of it, every ounce of effort, had led me here. And still, to my family, I was nothing. For a moment, I let myself imagine walking away completely, cutting them off, disappearing, into my work, letting them crown Michael king of the ashes while I lived my own life far from their judgment. It would have been easier, maybe even healthier. But deep down, I knew that walking away wasn't enough. Not after what I'd heard. Because the truth was, it wasn't just about me anymore. They weren't just dismissing my choices. They were dismissing everything I had built, everything my team had poured into our work, everything we had fought to create. To let them erase that would be to let them win. So, in that dark little guest room, I started to plan. Not out of spite, not even purely out of revenge, but out of absolute necessity. If they weren't going to recognize me willingly, then I'd have to force them to see me for who I really was. I pulled out my laptop, the glow of the screen cutting through the shadows. My company's dashboard lit up. Numbers, contracts, client lists, all the things my family had never cared enough to ask about. I scrolled through the data, reminding myself that I wasn't a failure. No matter what they said, I had something real, something that mattered. And that's when the idea began to form. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. Enough to spark that fire in my chest again. If they wanted to crown Michael as the heir, let them. If they wanted to laugh at me, fine. I'd let them keep laughing right up until the moment I turned the lights on and showed them exactly who they had been mocking all these years. But until then, I kept my silence. The next morning, I joined them for breakfast, my face carefully blank, my words measured. They chatted and laughed as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't been gutted the night before. Not one of them noticed how different I felt inside. I didn't correct them. I didn't defend myself. I let them believe I was still the weak one, still the joke of the family. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to fight in the moment. It's to wait. To let your enemies grow comfortable in their arrogance until the moment comes when you can strike with precision. And as I packed my bag to leave that afternoon, Mom gave me a perfunctory hug. Dad clapped my shoulder without meeting my eyes. And Michael smirked like he'd won something permanent. But I knew better. They thought they'd buried me. They had no idea I was already digging my way out. When I drove away from my parents' house that afternoon, the winter air felt colder than usual, the frost biting against the windshield, as if it wanted to remind me how raw the night before had been. But underneath that sting, something inside me had shifted. It wasn't just bitterness anymore. It was fuel. That car ride home was quiet, just me and the hum of the engine. But it felt like the first time in years I was steering towards something greater, something that didn't depend on their approval. Back at my apartment, I slipped inside the cramped space my aunt had called adorably small, with her sugar-coated smirk. And sure, the place was modest. One bedroom, squeaky floors, a kitchen that could barely hold 2 people. But when I opened my laptop and signed into my work dashboard, all of that melted away. Because on that screen was proof that my life was not the failure they believed it to be. It was the start of something real. January came with momentum. A contract I'd been chasing for months finally landed, doubling the workload for me and my small but loyal team. I could still remember the excitement in their voices when I announced it during our video call. "This is it," one of them said. "This is the turning point." And it was. Revenue climbed, clients renewed, and for the first time, we weren't just scraping by. We were thriving. I upgraded slowly, carefully. First, I hired 2 more employees, people who believed in the vision, even when the hours were long and the rewards not immediate. Then I rented out a proper office space, a modest floor in a building downtown. Nothing flashy, but with tall windows that looked out over the city. I still remember unlocking the door for the first time, walking through the empty space, imagining desks lined with monitors, a hum of conversation, the quiet rhythm of a team building something that mattered. And the best part? My family had no idea. They still thought I was plugging away at a side project, that I was wasting my potential on something doomed to fail. When they called, they'd ask the same dismissive questions. "Still doing that little business of yours?" Mom would say, her voice dipped in syrupy politeness. Dad would sometimes add, "You know, if it doesn't work out, Michael could probably get you an interview at his firm." I'd smile, keep my voice steady, and say, "Thanks. I'll think about it." Because why correct them now? Let them live in their bubble. As spring rolled in, the contracts kept stacking. By April, we were working with a client so large that signing the deal felt surreal. I sat in my new office after everyone had gone home, staring at the signed agreement on the table. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself breathe. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was success. But success came with choices, and I made mine carefully. Instead of parading my achievements around, I funneled money into investments, diversified, and started setting up safety nets I never thought I'd need. I learned about trusts, LLC protections, legal shields, things most people in their 20s don't think about. But after hearing my parents plotting to cut me out of the estate, I realized something important. Family can be fickle. Paperwork, however, cannot. So, I built my own protections quietly. My business accounts were airtight, my contracts watertight. And while my family slept easy, thinking Michael was their golden ticket, I was weaving a safety net so strong that no one, not even them, could rip it from me. By summer, I had moved out of that cramped apartment. Not into a mansion, not yet, but into a sleek 2-bedroom condo with tall glass windows and a balcony that overlooked the city skyline. It wasn't just about comfort. It was about a daily reminder that I wasn't the person they thought I was. Every morning, I'd sip coffee on that balcony, watching the sunrise over the buildings, and I'd think about how Mom had sliced me that sliver of pie while crowning Michael, her successful son. I thought about Dad's toast. I thought about the laughter. And every time I did, I worked harder. Michael and I still spoke occasionally, though the conversations were always lopsided. He'd brag about his firm, his condo, his expensive vacations. He'd ask about me in that casual, condescending tone, as if checking in on a younger cousin still figuring life out. "So, Nat," he'd say, "you making anything off that little project yet?" I'd chuckle, keeping my voice neutral. "Yeah, it's going okay." And he'd laugh like I just told a joke. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my little project had just surpassed his entire yearly salary. The irony wasn't lost on me. Yet, even as my life grew brighter, I couldn't shake the shadow of what I'd overheard that Christmas night. No matter how far I climbed, the image of my parents, whispering to Michael, promising him everything while dismissing me entirely, was burned into my memory. And with each step I took forward, each victory I claimed, the weight of that betrayal only grew heavier. I told myself I was building for me, for my team, for the vision we all believed in. And that was true. But buried underneath, there was another reason, a quieter one. I was waiting for the right moment. Because as much as my family had written me off, as much as they had erased me, I knew there would come a day when they couldn't ignore me anymore. And when that day came, they wouldn't be laughing. Autumn crept in, and with it came the kind of shift that doesn't announce itself with fireworks, but changes everything all the same. By September, my company wasn't just stable. It was thriving beyond what I could have imagined 2 years earlier. We'd expanded to a team of 20, landed contracts that made even seasoned firms take notice, and were quietly becoming a name in the industry. The kind of name people in boardrooms whispered about, wondering how we were doing it so fast. I kept my head down, stayed quiet, and let the work speak for itself. But that didn't stop others from noticing. One morning, I opened my inbox to find an email from a major investor, someone whose name I'd seen splashed across tech articles for years. He wanted to meet. My hands shook a little as I read it over again, half convinced I was hallucinating. But when I sat across from him in a sleek downtown office a week later, it was very real. "You've built something impressive," he said, flipping through the report my team had put together. "I think we can scale this further, much further." That meeting changed everything. Within weeks, we secured an investment that didn't just pad our accounts, it supercharged us. We opened a second office, this one in a neighboring city. I hired a seasoned operations manager, something I dreamed of, but never thought we could afford. Suddenly, the future wasn't just promising, it was inevitable. And all the while, my family remained oblivious. The phone calls from Mom and Dad stayed the same, filled with stories of Michael's achievements and the occasional half-hearted question about my project. When I mentioned the new office casually once, Mom laughed softly. "That's nice, honey. Maybe someday you'll get a real job again." I didn't correct her. Not yet. But then something happened that set the stage for everything. In early October, I got an unexpected call from my aunt, one of the few relatives who had always treated me with kindness, even if she never fully understood what I did. She invited me to lunch, and over soup and sandwiches, she leaned in, lowering her voice. "Your parents have been talking," she said, glancing around like the walls might have ears. "They're updating their estate plans. From what I heard, everything is going to Michael. The house, the savings, even your grandfather's land." I felt the words hit me like a familiar punch, though this time I didn't flinch. Instead, I just nodded. And she added, her voice softening, "They've been telling people that you don't really have much going on. That Michael is the one to trust, the one who'll take care of the family when they're gone." There it was again. The quiet erasure. The rewriting of who I was. But this time I had something they didn't know. Leverage. Because just a week earlier, my company had finalized a deal with a major client that directly tied into one of Michael's firm's biggest accounts. In fact, the work we were doing would soon intersect with his, only from the opposite side of the table. And if things went the way I expected, my company wouldn't just be participating in that space. We'd be leading it. For the first time, I realized something. Michael's world and mine were no longer separate. They were on a collision course. That night, I sat in my condo, the city lights glittering outside the window, and I couldn't help but laugh quietly to myself. For years, my family had told me I'd never catch up to Michael, never measure up, never matter. And yet here I was, in a position not only to match him, but to surpass him in ways they couldn't even imagine. I started to map things out more deliberately. Not revenge, not yet, but strategy. I tightened my legal protections, built stronger contracts, and consulted with advisors who helped me prepare for expansion. I moved assets quietly into places no one in my family could ever touch, not even by accident. And all the while I waited. Because I knew Christmas was coming again. Another dinner, another stage where they would laugh and dismiss and toast to Michael's greatness. Only this time, the stage would be different. Because this time, I wouldn't just be the forgotten son at the end of the table. I'd be holding the kind of power they couldn't ignore. And when the clock struck midnight again, the quiet foundation I had built in secret would be ready to rise. Christmas came around faster than I expected. It was strange. Last year, I had dreaded it, every mile of the drive to my parents' house filling me with the kind of anxiety you can taste at the back of your throat. But this time, the closer the holiday drew, the calmer I felt. Not because I had forgiven them. No, but because I knew something they didn't. For the first time, I had the upper hand. I arrived at the house that afternoon, carrying a bottle of wine and a small wrapped box, just like everyone else. The place looked the same, lights strung across the porch, the smell of roasted turkey wafting out the door. My mother's laugh echoed in the foyer as she greeted Michael first, pulling him into a warm hug before she even noticed me behind him. "Oh, Nathan, you're here too," she said, her voice polite but distracted. I smiled faintly. Wouldn't miss it. Dinner unfolded almost like a rerun of last year. Michael bragged about his firm's record profits. Rachel talked about their honeymoon plans, and my parents nodded along, proud and glowing. I was, as usual, the afterthought. When I mentioned the new condo I'd moved into, Dad frowned and said, "Hopefully, you're being smart with your money. You don't want to overextend yourself." Michael chuckled and added, "Don't worry, Dad. If he falls, I'll help him out." The table laughed. I stayed quiet. I let them. Because I knew what was waiting. Halfway through dessert, as Dad raised his glass to toast Michael's bright future again, I pulled out my phone and set it gently on the table. "Actually," I said, my voice calm, almost casual. "There's something I should probably tell you all." The room quieted. Forks clinked on plates. Even Michael's smirk faltered a little. I tapped the screen, opening a news article that had gone live just an hour earlier. The headline glared across the top, "Local tech firm lands landmark contract, poised to redefine industry standards." Beneath it was a photo of me standing with my team in front of our new office, smiles wide, confidence. "Clear. This is me," I said simply, sliding the phone toward them. Mom leaned closer, her brow furrowing. "What is this?" Michael picked up the phone, his eyes darting across the text, his jaw tight. This can't be right." "It is," I replied. "That little side project you've all been laughing at? That's my company." And as of last week, we closed a deal that not only secures our growth for years, but also intersects with your firm's biggest client. I turned to Michael. "Which means, starting next quarter, you'll be reporting numbers against us." The silence that followed was almost tangible. My dad's hand, mid-toast, froze in the air. My mom blinked rapidly, as if trying to process what she was reading. Rachel's polite smile had vanished. And Michael, he looked like someone had just pulled the rug out from under him. I leaned back in my chair, my voice calm but edged with steel. "Funny, isn't it? You've all spent years telling me I'd never measure up, that I was wasting my time. That Michael was the future of this family. And yet, here we are. Your so-called failure is sitting at the same table, holding cards you didn't even know existed." No one laughed this time. I didn't gloat. Not outright. I didn't raise my voice or slam the table. I let the silence do the work. I let their faces, confused, stunned, even a little fearful, speak volumes. And then, just as casually, I picked up my fork and took another bite of pie. The balance of power had shifted, and they knew it. For a long, heavy moment, no one spoke. The air around the table was thick, as if all the warmth from the Christmas lights had drained out, leaving only the weight of realization pressing down on every face. My mother finally broke the silence, her voice unsteady. "Nathan, why didn't you tell us?" She reached across the table, but the gesture wasn't maternal. It was desperate, like someone grasping for a rope slipping through their fingers. I met her eyes, calm. "Because you never asked. Every time I tried to tell you something, you brushed it aside. Turned the conversation back to Michael. You didn't want to hear it. And now? Now you don't get to claim it." Her hand faltered, retreating back to her lap. My dad cleared his throat. his tone shifting into the commanding voice he always used when he thought he could control the room. Son, don't be dramatic. You know, we've always wanted what's best for you. If this venture of yours is really growing, then that's good news for all of us. Families share in success. I let out a small laugh. Sharp and humorless. Families share support too. Respect. Encouragement. I've been giving without ever receiving. And now you want to claim my success as your own? No. Michael's jaw was tight, his face pale. You don't understand what you're getting into. If your company overlaps with ours, it won't end well for you. You're playing in a world you don't belong to. Funny, I said, leaning forward, my voice low but steady. That's exactly what you told me about life in general. But I do belong here. And now, whether you like it or not, your firm will be competing with mine. Only difference? I've been underestimated my whole life. You have no idea how much I've learned from being the one in the shadows. Rachel shifted uncomfortably, her hand brushing Michael's arm. Maybe we should talk about this later, she whispered, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. Doubt in Michael. Doubt in the family narrative they had built around him. The rest of the evening was stiff. Conversation died in the corners, smiles forced and brittle. My parents tried to recover, asking questions with sudden, performative interest. So, who are your clients? What kind of offices? How many employees? But their voices were strained, their pride cracked. I answered politely, but sparingly. They weren't owed my details. They had forfeited the right to share in this part of my life. When dessert plates were cleared and people began gathering coats, my father placed a hand on my shoulder, squeezing a little too hard. You're still my son, he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Remember that. I held his gaze. I am. But you're the ones who forgot it. The drive home felt different this year. The snow on the streets glowed under the streetlights, and for the first time in a long time, I felt light. I had faced them not with anger or shouting, but with truth, and the truth had cut deeper than any outburst could. The fallout came quickly. In the weeks after Christmas, I heard from my aunt again. My parents had been making frantic calls, trying to figure out how they had missed what I'd been doing, spinning excuses to cover their ignorance. Michael, meanwhile, had gone unusually quiet. Word in his circles was that his firm was uneasy. Competition was coming from an unexpected direction, and he was rattled. But I didn't reach out. I didn't explain. I didn't offer comfort or gloat. I let the silence sit. The same silence they had left me in for years. And for once, I wasn't the punchline. I was the story. That Christmas, my family finally learned a truth they'd spent years laughing away. The son they dismissed. The one they sliced the smallest piece of pie for. The one they wrote out of the future. He was already shaping it. And as I stood on my balcony weeks later, coffee in hand, watching the city lights stretch endlessly before me, I realized something. I didn't need their pride. I didn't need their approval. Because I had built something stronger than both. And whether they liked it or not, they would never look at me the same way again. So, what do you guys think? If you were in my shoes, after all that betrayal and dismissal, would you have revealed your success, or would you have just quietly walked away for good? Let me know in the comments below. I really want to hear your thoughts.